Hi, I'm talking today about the new notice on the Federal Register that's reducing federal burden for Head Start programs. Just a take-home message, really quick: the ACF proposes to replace most of the federal Head Start regulatory framework with a much smaller rule that shifts many of the operating standards to the states and to local programs. And the central trade-off is potentially greater enrollment and flexible versus greater variation in staffing, service intensity, health, family supports, and program quality. But let's face it, I live in Oklahoma. Oklahoma has very few resources. I mean, higher education, there's a reason that we rank so highly among the 50 states for these things. It's because the population is that of the St. Louis metro, and we still have all of those fixed costs. So when you shift these burdens to the states, what you're basically doing is any of the poorer states, they're just not going to have it. That's what's going to happen. There are things that belong in the federal government and things that belong in the states, and in the ideal world, I think this probably could be done by the states effectively. The administrative part is even questionable because they just don't have the resources. But bottom line, maybe I should fill you in. This is in the Federal Register, and the Federal Register is the daily publication of the federal government, really the executive branch under the president, all of the agencies. Every time they do something that is of significance policy-wise, or if they're going to have a meeting or anything like that, or they need comments from the public, they will post notices in the Federal Register, and it's available online, and you can see old Federal Registers going back decades. Okay? But anyway, it's official publication, and what they do, they publish these. This is a formal publication, and it includes things like rules and proposed rules that they might want feedback on, notices, presidential documents like executive orders, and even proclamations. So today I'll talk about this Head Start program change. I do want to hear your feedback if you have any. I mean, you can put comments down below, or liking the video is very helpful. This is a new channel, and I'm putting out a few of these each week, and then I have an associated short with it, sort of like an advertisement. But, the odds that I ever get anything out of this beyond just informing the public are probably pretty low. But my goal is to give you a no BS literal interpretation of what is being done with the new policy, and whether what are they really doing with, and what have the government officials said about this, and the legislative branch who's supposed to be providing oversight over these executive actions. Is anybody saying anything? I'm Malcolm McCallum, and what I am is I'm a PhD in environmental sciences. And at first, a lot of you are going, well, what's a wildlife guy doing policy reviews? Well, actually, environmental sciences, it's a multidisciplinary field that covers policy, economics, environmental biology, environmental chemistry, and environmental geology. So we have to have an education in the social sciences and the physical and the biological sciences in order to do the kinds of things that environmental sciences do. Generally, if you look at the field of environmental science, its role is to protect everyday people from the rich and powerful. And so, and the natural world from the rich and powerful as well. So this world that we live in is called the socio-ecological world. There's a social system and an ecological system that are integrated. And so we have to know something about policy and law and all those kind of things. And I've taught in all of these areas at the university level over the years. So I figure if I explain some of these bigger notices, the ones that are maybe a little more important, because I can't possibly do them all, then I'll be helping out people to understand what's going on, and maybe they'll have a better idea of what these policies mean to them or others. And and at the end of the day, it'll tell you, is the government working for you or somebody else? And like I said, remember to try to hit the like button, and if you subscribe, that'd be great. It just means that if one of these videos comes up in the future, it'll show up on your little feed sooner. So the Administration for Children and Families is the ACF, and it's proposing to take the Head Start program performance standards. This is Code of Federal. It's 45 Code of Federal Regulations, parts 1301 through 1305, and replace them with a streamlined part 1301. This is actually removing like 1,400 regulations. And yeah, now there's fewer regulations. But why do we have regulations? Regulations are there to protect the children in Head Start, their families, who are usually not exactly wealthy, and the larger community of people who benefit by having people go through Head Start. It's not just the families that benefit. When people have an education, they spend money, and they spend that money in their communities, and that drives the economic system. This isn't conjecture, it's a fact. Okay? If nobody has an education of some kind, whether it be auto mechanics, that's an education, or be it nuclear physics. If nobody has an education, the world doesn't move forward. Okay? And the gateway to education is Head Start for many people. So this isn't just a routine paperwork rule either. ACF's own economic analysis assumes that the substantial share of projected savings, it could come from fewer personnel expenditures effectively. Shorter preschool service hours, so they're not in those programs as long, and fewer home visits, and lower health and mental health expenditures, and lower administrative cost ceilings, and all of this highfalutin expenses that make it sound like it's just waste. It's only waste if you're rich. If you're rich, you don't need Head Start. But being a citizen of the United States, you pay taxes, I hope, and those taxes are there to make the citizenry of the United States better. And that means that people who maybe aren't so lucky as you they get tossed a bone once in a while, and Head Start is that bone. Many statutory duties would remain in force even when the corresponding regulatory text disappears. So a removed regulation does not automatically mean that every underlying protection disappears, but I'm going to tell you right now that if there's nobody doing the work and it's not required, then it isn't going to get done. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. But I bet a rocket scientist is benefiting by not having to have their money go into the public trust to provide for the people who actually make those people wealthy. So let's see what exactly they are proposing. Well, there's a regulatory structure, and this rescinds, as I've already said, rescinds part of the Code of Federal Regulations on Head Start. There'll be far fewer operational details, more reliance on statute and state rules and grants and monitoring and local discretion, and of course it'll probably end up with more lawsuits when things don't go right because they're not being monitored the same way that they are currently. Of course, class size and teacher-student ratios will change, and they're going to replace the Head Start specific federal group size. They say that you can only have a certain size classroom. So now we can just have a teacher with 9 million students in the class because, hey, that's the same as having a teacher with 2 students. Neither extreme, which is good. Some programs could increase children per teachers, they say. I'm going to tell you all Head Start programs will end up with way more teachers. And having taught at every level of education from kindergarten on up to medical school and PhDs, I can tell you that a large classroom size is not good for education. It's fine for a lecture hall of pre-med students or something like that. It isn't fine for kids who have extreme economic stress, may not even be getting meals consistently, and now they've got to go to school hungry and try to learn. Come on. This isn't like difficult stuff to understand. It's difficult stuff for selfish people to accept because they don't care if this stuff's going on. The United States is economically stronger than it's portrayed on TV. Okay? We are the first or the second largest economy in the world, depending on the year, and we have a very powerful economy. We can afford to go wage war wherever we want, whenever we want, and then just complain that it's costing money. And yet, we can't afford to have some kids go through Head Start. It's not even a lot of kids when you look at the population of our country. This is pretty ridiculous. So this is going to remove the federal 1,020-hour preschool requirement and return to the statutory floor, meaning they're going to drop it down as low as you possibly can. You know, if you watch college sports or pro sports, you know that a team has a floor and a team has a ceiling, and it usually falls somewhere in between. If you only fund it for the floor, the team's going to stink because its floor is going to drop even lower. Nothing ever got better by slashing its budget or slashing its resources. Nothing. And if you don't believe that, look at healthcare in America. It was once one of the best in the world. Look at our government agencies have been cut to the bone by selfish benefactors of politicians that just think we can cut everything because we don't need anything. Rich people don't need anything. The rest of us do. The programs will have shorter program years. Primary scenario assumes that 66 fewer hours annually for affected preschool services. This is going to affect people trying to go to work too. They're going to remove detailed federal visit frequencies and durations and socialization and caseload requirements for home-based services, which are often very needed. The programs could redesign or reduce home visiting. ACF models of 50% home visitor workforce reduction in its primary scenario. I mean, they visit the homes because they need to meet with the parents, and the parents are economically strapped, and it's difficult for them to visit the school. Come on, this isn't rocket science, people. Anybody who's, I'm not even going to go there. Health and mental health issues. This is going to remove several of the detailed federal procedures, including monthly mental health consultations, health navigation requirements, daily toothbrushing. I mean, they're not doing anything. The point of Head Start is to make sure these children rise above the problems that they are having. And this doesn't happen just by when you're 5, just saying, wow, my parents are poor, I can't afford to eat, but oh well, I'm going to be strong internally and beat everybody else and become a billionaire. It isn't happening, okay? It never did happen. It's going to remove the federal requirement for a bus monitor on board the buses at all times. Now think about this. These are little kids. These are not like high school kids. Young preschool children in a bus. The bus driver isn't qualified to do anything except drive the bus. He or she happens to be someone with a CDL. These kids are young enough, you got to have a monitor in there, or the kids are unsupervised. If you left your kids in your car with some guy who was a chauffeur, they probably are going to ask what's going on. But, the billionaires need to be able to, buy one more share of Exxon or whatever the heck stock they're buying this month. Not SpaceX, obviously. So, It's going to remove several federal qualifications and professional development requirements beyond those required by statute for the staff. These are the same people who, in many states, have crushed the salaries of teachers, and then because their salaries are so bad and their compensation is so bad and the prospects for raises are so bad, they just open it up and say anybody who wants to teach, we'll give you a provisional teaching certificate to come in and teach these kids whatever it is you know. Of course, do you know anything? Oh, we don't care. We just need a warm body because we'd like these people to be stupid. That way we can take advantage of them when they get older. Don't underestimate that motivation. It's definitely there. The requirements for education to be conducted in English, with tribal language exception tied to the preservation of tribal heritage, is going to be added in there. And you're talking about a 5-year-old again. If the parents largely don't know English, or they speak Spanish, the 5-year-old speaks Spanish. Come on. So what are you going to do? Have them in there and just expect a 5-year-old to suddenly become bilingual? I think people have reached the epitome of stupid or ignorant or just plain don't care. Because they want the money, even if it's just a small, measly amount in the American budget that goes to Head Start. And it is a measly amount. Sounds big when you hear the quantity. It's actually a measly amount when you consider that one fighter jet costs more than almost the whole program, I believe. Maybe worse than that now, I don't know. At one point it was that way. I haven't looked back. It also reduces the allowable development and administrative costs from 15% to 5% with a waiver authority. Who knows what the waiver is? They like to put waiver authorities in here and then never give you any idea how to get the waivers. This is a large reallocation towards direct services. Only a small share of the grants currently operate at or below 5% anyway. I mean currently. That 5% is money to maintain the facilities effectively. Then we have nutrition activity, and this does add stronger emphasis on nutrient-dense foods and minimum physical activity and stuff like that. So from that perspective, that's kind of good. And it creates a clearer federal floor in these areas, even as many other requirements are removed. Of course, we'll see how this actually pans out. This is the way they're posing it. Of course, family engagement, they're still retaining the statutory governance roles, but make some process less prescriptive and add father engagement and healthy marriage content and stuff like that. And you know what? When both of you are working 40, 50-hour weeks at 3 or 4 different part-time jobs because nobody's hiring full-time for people who are in that situation, and you're barely paying any of your bills, and you're worried about whether you'll be able to give a birthday present to your kid or whether you'll even be able to eat dinner next week, and you're living in low-income housing, and you got to work so much that you can't improve yourself because you can't go and get educated because you got to work so much just to accumulate enough hours to be on minimum wage or something close to it. And yeah, they increase minimum wage, but increasing minimum wage only does so much. Maybe it would be better to actually increase cost of living raises. That would make sense. And that's across the board, and it affects everybody, including the minimum wage people. That would be an interesting thing. It would help out everybody involved. Raise more taxes too, because now people are making more money. But anyway, there's more local discretion here, and I was starting to go on a tangent, but also the new federal normative content in family programming will be there. I mean, I don't know what... Removing regulatory language on a statutory duty does not repeal the duty itself, okay? So that regulatory language is still there. This distinction is essential when evaluating claims that the proposal either eliminates or preserves a particular protection. And in fact, on paper, it probably doesn't eliminate and probably doesn't preserve anything. But when we get to actual action and people are doing the work, they're going to do what they have to do, and the stuff they don't have to do or aren't being encouraged to do is going to get sacrificed. And that's a lot of this oversight stuff that they're removing the language. And you can argue whether it's on purpose or it's thinking that it'll make things better. Everybody's got their own opinion. So the actual rationale for this is that regulatory simplification, as it always is when Republicans are in office. They look to reduce regulation, and the motivation behind this, you can argue whatever you want, it's economic, okay? They also like there to be local control, and you can argue whether that local control is better or not, or more subjected to, if local entities are more subject to, easier to take advantage of in one fashion or another. Of course, it's the enrollment capacity. Basically, Head Start is a grant-funded program, and the ACF argues lower operating costs can be reinvested in additional funding slots rather than removed from the program. But the fact is, there's a reason that the enrollment is not bigger per teacher and so forth. Of course, there's fewer federal credentials and ratios and staffing requirements. Clearly the people doing this, I often wonder if they even have a clue what it's like to be in a schoolroom, okay? The administration is emphasizing nutrition, though, and physical activity, which is good, because sometimes that gets lost in the mix, and parental authority as a core program priority. And, I think that maybe in most cases those things are probably good. They publicly characterized the proposal as a $2.2 billion reinvestment that could preserve or expand as many as 236,000 slots. I believe that's baloney. I'm sorry. That's just my opinion. I don't think that you're going to get anywhere close to that. The formal regulatory analysis is more conservative in that its primary funded slot calculation at full implementation in 2031 is probably going to be around 116,000 additional Head Start preschool slots. Plus, there'll also be 46,000 early Head Start slots. So that's about 162,000 in a year. And, that's substantially less than 236. Okay? And that may be the case. I'll be surprised if it improves anything from that perspective. ACF cautions that the actual results depend on local decisions. And see, we're not responsible. We put it in their hands. We didn't give them enough money, and now they can't they don't fill the boats despite the fact that we told them to. See, that's the kind of approach it is, and it's widespread. It's not something new. We've all seen it. Okay, there are arguments supporting the proposal, and so, Head Start regulations are unusually detailed. Of course they are, because dealing with 5-year-olds is unusually risky. They're highly impressionable. They're easily injured mentally and physically. You need people in there who know what the hell they're doing, not just any dumb idiot off the street. But they say removing these provisions that merely restate the act or other federal law can make the compliance systems easier to understand. Of course they can. If there's no rules, they're easy to comply with, aren't they? Regulations have a purpose. The idea that we need to deregulate everything is folly. It's folly. It's a fool's gambit. Regulations are necessary to protect everyday people from the rich and powerful. That's what they're there for. The rich and powerful can bypass regulations very easily because they have buco bucks to spend. And some of these people have more money to spend than some countries. The uniform federal rules can fit local conditions poorly. Rural, tribal, urban, migrant, and seasonal programs operate in very different labor markets, things like that. So yeah, those are, there should be some flexibility for local areas, and I think that's a good thing. Some commonly used structural quality measures have weaker evidence base than public debate implies. I mean, a systematic review of the child-staff ratios found few consistent associations with child outcomes within a range of ratios studied, but it's not like we have rooms full of 85-year-olds, okay? So these studies have their own limitations, and they can't be done as a true controlled experiment. They're observational, so there are weaknesses in the studies themselves, and so depending on those kind of studies to support this they're not wrong, but they have to be with a caveat. What is the actual range of students you're dealing with? If you're going from 10 to 15 or from 5 to 10, seriously, it's probably no effect. But if you go between 80 and 5, I guarantee there's a difference. Of course, access does have value, and that's what they claim the goal here is to improve access, and they also want to lower per child operating costs. But the thing is I don't know how you could lower them much more. I mean, these people aren't exactly getting paid good wages to do this work. And I believe there's even volunteers doing stuff. So then the rule does not repeal the Head Start Act. Of course not, because they can't. That requires legislation. It's legislation. Laws are removed by law. Policies are removed by policy. Anything published in the Federal Register is policy. It is not law. And policies can change at a whim by the executive branch, whereas laws have to go through an entire legislative process of proposal, voting, and signed into law by the president. And of course, the nutrition and activity provisions are constructive. Those are actually, at least as I've read, seem to be reasonable, if not even improvements. But there are arguments against this too, and I kind of voiced some of them early, and that is that the projected savings are not mostly clerical. The ACF's own model derives major savings from reductions in staffing. And staffing is teachers, okay? Head Start teachers. Home visits to make sure that things are working okay. Transportation monitor time, health and mental health expenditures. I mean, these kids need that kind of stuff. And their parents can't afford it. The National Anti-Poverty Program could become geographically uneven when the federal floor is replaced by state licensing. Children in different states may receive different class sizes, staffing levels, transportation protections. I mean, there are some things you want everybody to be treated fairly across the country when delivering a program like this, just like Social Security. You don't want people in Oklahoma to be retiring under 50 cents to live on, and then people in Louisiana getting $500 to live on, as if you could live on either of those sums of money. You want there to be some consistency, and there to be guidelines that actually keep that consistency in the fairest way we can do it. This sort of just opens it up and makes it a Wild West kind of thing. The 5% administrative cap is unusually disruptive for existing Head Start budgets because that's how they pay for the program to continue. They got to pay for their heat and so forth. It's not like they're just cutting it, okay? That saves money. If it saves money, hey, we want to do it. But just it doesn't save money if your program isn't functioning right, and it causes it causes people not to rise up above the problems that they're under. Because then it's just, you're wasting money, right? If you're throwing money and you're not actually using it in a good way, and when you cut things to a certain level, the money is no longer able to do anything. So, that's the danger that you face when you keep cutting things. The health and family supports are part of Head Start's distinctive model, and weakening those can create big problems. And of course, the English-only instruction is not simply deregulation, it's a new federal mandate, and I almost guarantee it'll turn right around as soon as the presidency changes. I mean, it's not really... This isn't about whether people should learn English. It's about being able to communicate with children who don't. That's a different thing. Many years ago, I had an opportunity. I could have moved down to the Mexico border. I liked the university and so forth. And my big worry was that I didn't know Spanish, and a lot of the people who you were running into spoke Spanish more than they spoke English, because you were on the Mexico border. Well, it was very obvious that you may have students who you might want to be able to talk to in their native language to be able to make sure they understand what you're talking about, while you might be speaking in English 90% of the time. And this is the kind of thing that you deal with a 5-year-old. You're dealing with a lot more of that, because think about most 5-year-olds barely know language anyway. Okay? So what kind of political statements have been made? Well, from the administration perspective, the Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and the ACF Assistant Secretary, Alex Adams, have presented the proposal as a return to Head Start's roots. I don't know what that means. With fewer federal rules, of course, we've added rules because they were needed. More authority for parents, okay, that's a value statement, and I'm fine with that. And local communities, stronger nutrition and physical health programs. Now, what is stronger? Okay, in the implementation of this, there are some far out ideas that could be incorporated in here under some administrations, but generally I think that's a very good thing. And the workforce flexibility and reinvestment into enrollment. What you're basically doing is saying we're going to have more kids with fewer teachers, and that is not a good thing when you're dealing with at-risk students. Health and Human Services says statutory obligations remain binding, and argues that the rule can expand access without forcing programs to abandon practices that are working locally, and that's good. Okay, if it's true, we can't really prove that it's true or not true until later on, after the policy's been implemented. Democratic congressional opposition is by Senator Patty Murray, Senator Ben Ray Lujan, I think his name's Lujan, I don't know, it's Lujan, and Representative Rosa DeLauro have directly opposed this program. Their principal argument is that the national standards are the quality and safety floor that makes the Head Start comparable across states. They specifically point to class size and staffing and health screening and mental health supports and disability protections and administrative capacity and all the at-risk servicing more children by providing them less to each child is all that they're saying that all this program does is shove more kids in the classroom and just give them less service so that it's less effective. And that's a fair argument. It is a fair argument coming from someone who has been in the classroom. Okay, and I'm talking about kindergarten. Okay, I never taught preschool. Murray and Lujan have also explicitly urged parents and teachers to submit their comments and promised congressional oversight. The Republican congressional response, there is none. Basically, they aren't oversighting anything from what I can tell. Almost every one of these, we have these few Democrats that have, in this case, but usually I don't find very many responses of any. We've only got, how many House of Representatives and then how many senators? And you add that together, and I can only come up with three people who have anything to say about this, and it's a massive change for the poor. It's very strange to me. Or maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe I should have learned to expect this. Especially in an election year. I guess maybe they want to stay away from it so that they're not associated with it. I don't know. Provider and advocacy groups, they feel that the Head Start organizations and early childhood advocates are reviewing a rule that simultaneously promises flexibility and removes many uniform operating standards. Their practical question is whether local discretion comes with sufficient funding, staffing, monitoring, state capacity to preserve comprehensive services. And I mean, we don't really have to ask that question. The answer is the question, and we know that it's not gonna. Okay, we know it's not going to. That's common sense. If we look at the science and policy background, of course, we know that Head Start overall, whatever the evidence suggests that randomized Head Start impact studies found positive effects on preschool experiences, and basically they work. That's what it finds. And what it doesn't prove, though, is that every Head Start component is equally effective, or that the short-term score fade-out means that comprehensive program has no social value. So, some of these things that people will use logical fallacies that they draw on because of cognitive biases of their own. And so they think they are coming up with a real answer when they're really just saying what they think instead of what the evidence shows. The child staff ratios issue, well, the evidence suggests that there is a 2017 systematic review, and so it found few consistent associations between ratios and measured child outcomes within observed range. But that's a review. Okay? Reviews just are only as good as the studies they cite, and it's pretty difficult to make a firm conclusion on a series of studies that have been undertaken in different places under different conditions with different funding mechanisms, different numbers of students, different kinds of students, different levels of students, different kinds of teachers, different levels of teachers, different numbers of teachers, different kinds of environment, different kinds of households, different kinds of income, different kinds of legal problems, all of these things. And you're just going to kind of say, yeah, well, it works fine because most of these studies are unique little components, and they don't average out because they're very different from each other. The research generally supports the importance of a responsive teacher-child interactions, which can only come when there's few enough students for there to be student-teacher interactions. There is a time when you'd hear about, like in old Catholic schools, the nun standing there with the ruler, and they've got 40 kids in a classroom who are all 7, and they'd hit them with a ruler. Well, yeah, the only tool they had was to use fear to keep the kids sitting in the desks because there were too many kids to actually control. I mean, unless you want your kids being hit with a board all the time, I think that's probably a good idea for the number of students to be manageable. Okay, and 45-year-olds is not manageable. No way. The dual language learning issue I've beat to death. The strongest evidence-based policy position really is kind of selective rather than ideologically. Simplify requirements that are genuinely duplicative or unsupported. Yeah, that stuff makes sense. But preserve safeguards where reducing service intensity could plausibly affect safety, access, health, continuity, things like that. When we talk about our overall socio-ecological system, of course, this is primarily on the social side, right? And we know that children in school readiness is a big issue, and more funded slots could extend access to more children. But is it really the same access if they don't have the same, if they aren't being given the same attention? And when I say attention, I mean services. Larger groups with fewer service hours, that is not equivalent. These are the same kind of people that think that having a 4-day teaching schedule is the same, 4 days at 10 hours is the same as 5 days at 8 hours. A 6-year-old or a 10-year-old's brain does not absorb. They plateau each day. So if you cut it to 4, all you've done is cut some of the learning out. The additional day hours become pretty much mental exhaustion. From a workforce perspective, lower credential barriers may help us hire more people, but do you want people who are unqualified teaching your kids in Head Start or anywhere else? That doesn't make any sense. You're unqualified for a reason. Same reason I'm unqualified to work on a diesel engine in a mechanic shop. I know something about diesel engines. I wouldn't be afraid to work on my own, but I'm sure as heck not qualified to be working on anyone else's. And it's very likely I'd screw it up. This will have better alignment with state licensing and early childhood systems. That's probably the case. But when we get to rural and small programs, the flexibility can help programs adapt to scarce labor. And of course, if you're in a rural area, that is a problem. But there's always been ways around that. Okay? From a federal governance standpoint, well, the smaller rule book may make compliance clearer. If you don't have any rules, you complied, right? So the central feedback loop, basically it deserves attention. You got lower cost per child, creates more available slots, which creates broader access, but that also potentially lowers staff and service intensity with weaker outcomes and, quite frankly, higher downstream needs. So it's if you're getting rid of people at one end, you're going to get less effective impact on people at the other. That's really what it boils down. What you put in affects what you get out. And when it comes to teaching in the lower grades, you need humans working with the kids who know how to work with kids. The ACF has identified a legitimate governance problem. That is true. And the Head Start regulations are extensive, and some provisions duplicate the statute, and federal rules can conflict with state licensing or constrain local adaptation. There is a credible case for major simplification efforts. So just because they're knocking out 1,400 rules doesn't mean that some of those rules should probably be reviewed and removed. That's very, very possible, and I have no doubt of that. But 1,400 is a lot. Okay. The weakness is that the proposal does not stop at simplification. Its regulatory impact analysis explicitly models large behavioral changes in staffing and service delivery and counts the associated lower expenditures as part of the mechanism through which enrollment can expand. And that makes this a redesign of the Head Start service model, not merely paperwork reduction as it's frankly being posed at some levels. It isn't paperwork reduction. It's only paperwork reduction because the policies aren't being performed. I mean, if the cop stops writing tickets, well, there's paperwork reduction, right? A stronger final rule could preserve the benefits of simplification while setting a limited set of national outcome and safety floors, and that could phrase the administrative cap or using a higher threshold for small and rural programs, requiring transparent monitoring of service reductions and testing whether enrollment expansion actually occurs without deterioration of child and family outcomes. So, I mean, these kind of things, it probably can be done, but as it's written, it's kind of questionable whether they're doing it, okay? The bottom line is that this is one of the most consequential Head Start rulemakings in decades, across multiple presidential parties, okay, including the current president himself. It's gone from him to Biden to him again, and before him was Obama, and before that was Bush, and this has made it through all those administrations pretty much unchanged because it was working pretty well. So this doesn't seem to be completely make a lot of sense to me, at least. But if it makes some sense to you, please post it down in the comments so that I can see what you got to say. I'd love to hear some opinions and ideas. The strategy does have coherent logic, okay? If some existing rules add cost, well, yeah, maybe it would be a good thing to deal with them so that they lower costs. Eliminating some can expand access. Well, that's possible. But you always got to remember, you get what you pay for. Okay, you get what you pay for. And right now, a lot of our representatives are paid for more from other people than us. So their motives have always got to be questioned. My assessment that, well, basically the simplification goal is reasonable and several proposed changes deserve serious consideration. But I do think this proposal is way too broad. And to assume that every projected cost reduction is a harmless efficiency is just plain baloney. Okay, the core policy question is basically regulation versus no regulation. That's what this is. But make it a free for all. We don't care what happens to the kids if they're treated right, if they're treated wrong. We don't care. Nobody's going to be monitoring it. So hey, we don't care. They're just poor people. They're not going to be anything. They're just going to be a scab on our back. And we're better off we just pick them off, right? And if you think that I'm exaggerating with that attitude, I've heard it firsthand from people in those financial positions. Am I saying that all those people have those positions? No. But it doesn't take all. It only takes one who has enough money to buy influence. I don't like this law because I don't think that it's doing what it's supposed to do. I mean, policy, not law, it's a policy. I don't like this policy, but the nice thing is that it is a policy and not a law, and policies don't last, especially when they're bad. This is one to watch, though. Public comment deadline is October 6th, so if you get out there, you can contact these people and tell them you like it or you don't like it. I encourage you. It doesn't matter whether you like it. The fact that I don't like the law doesn't mean that if you do like it, that's fine. You need to get out here and voice your opinion. If you don't like it, voice your opinion. If you like some things and not others, voice your opinion. Go into the Federal Register and read it. All you got to do is get on Google and put down 91 FR 51248-51322. Or you can put Federal Register, reducing federal burden for Head Start programs. Either one, you're going to get the document up. You can read the whole thing for yourself. See what you think. But the person you contact is Adam N. Jones. And I'm not revealing anything special here, telling you his phone number. It's posted in the Federal Register so you can contact him. And his phone number, he's the Chief of Staff of ACF, and his phone number is 202-417-0115. And you can call right up there. You'll probably get a secretary. You can also send an email, and it'll be called deregulation@acf.hhs.gov. Now, if for some reason my accent or the way I say things, not sure what I said, just go to the Federal Register and download it. It's there. Comments are part of the public record. They'll be on there when they make the decision, and they may be posted publicly, including identifying information submitted with the comment. So, your name with your comment will be on the document. And I think that's a good thing. Because that means that the representative that you have knows that you opened your mouth. And that makes you a more serious citizen and someone they got to worry about or be concerned about when elections come around. That's all I need to tell you about this today. This one took a long time, and I'm kind of surprised it took longer than I expected, because this isn't in my wheelhouse, really. I mean, I know about Head Start and so forth. But please, do take action and put comments up. Contact your representative and ask them what do they think of it? Why have they not heard any opinions? Why have you not heard any opinions from them in regard to this policy? I mean, what do you think's more important? That a bunch of kids who are poor rise up from poverty and become able to support themselves and maybe support others and help others, or that a football player transfers from one team to the other, or that a football team in college switches conferences? That's what they're busy with in Congress right now, while something of this importance is being basically ignored when I can count on one hand the number of representatives that have even talked about it. Have a nice day.